I was called to California, and so when I left Salt Lake, they didn't fly us to our missions. We traveled by horse and buggy, I think, but anyway, they put us on a train out of Salt Lake City, and it was at 8 o'clock at night, and we was going to travel all night and get to Los Angeles at 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. So me and another guy, we doubled up on a bunk and bought a bunk, and we went to sleep on the train, and then they headed on out. Didn't travel all that fast, but we got out in the edge of the California desert, and all of a sudden the train lurched, and it come to a screeching halt. We says, "What in that has happened?" They come back to, and they said, "The car just ahead of us is derailed, so we're going to be stuck there for a while." So we went out of cold country, and we got outside. We went out in our shirt sleeves, and it was warm, but we was stuck out there on the desert for several hours till they brought in a repair crew and moved the car off of the tracks and got them all. Then we headed on into California, and we never got there till about 6 o'clock that night. But I was assigned to go out to San Fernando Valley. They just opened that up to missionary service. Before that time, the missionaries in California were all out in the outlying areas, in the small towns out on the desert, down in Imperial Valley, which was the hellhole of the mission, so to speak. And I didn't know where I was going. And even up until November, before I got there, the mission president had all the missionaries out on without Persia script. So I had that little thing to face going out that I didn't know that I would enjoy that much. But if that's the way they did it, so be it. But anyway, the church says, "No way, we're not going to send any more missionaries out without Persia script." It's a black eye to the church. They were out begging for meals and for a place to live. But in the inner part of Los Angeles and all of the inner part, there was a ton of church members. It was very heavy amounts of church members all in there, and they were all in wards and stakes. And the procedure in those days for the wards and stakes was the stake missionaries. They would call stake missionaries, and they would be on a stake level the same as we were out in the mission field on a full-time mission. They went out, they tracked it, they contacted people, they taught them, and that's the way they did their missionary work. But the church determined that they were not doing the job the way that it should be done, that there was a lot of potential out there for full-time missions. So they decided, and that's the first place that they brought the missionaries into wards and stakes. Now it's all over the church, but they just a few weeks prior to me getting out there, they had opened up the San Fernando Valley to wards and stakes. So I went out and I was assigned to North Hollywood. Well, that was the Burbank stake, and it took all of the San Fernando Valley, clear out the San Fernando City, Reseda, all over the place. So I was assigned there, and my companion was the supervising elder, which is equal to a zone leader today. And so I traveled around a little bit but he was going home in 6 weeks. So I traveled around with him, and we went out, but he'd always assigned me out to the missionaries. So that's my first taste of missionary work was on a Monday morning. I got there on Friday and had the weekend, and that was fast Sunday, and so I got my first dose of 24-hour fast in the mission field. About died. But Monday morning went out, tracting, and so he assigned me out. An elder had been there 2 weeks, so we were kind of greenhorns at it. But we did a lot of tracting, and then along the middle of March, when my supervising elder companion, he went home, so they sent in another missionary, Elder Booth, Kent Booth. He was up north, Lompoc, or up that way. And so he was my companion, and we found another apartment, and we went to work. And we got a hold of the ward list, and so it had a lot of part-member families that was in there, where either one partner or the other was a member and the other was a non-member. Well, he says, I think that's about as a good a field to go and start cultivating as there is. So we took the ward list and we started hitting all the partner member families, and so we got loaded up right quickly with what they was then called cottage meetings, and we began to teach these people. Well, that caused some rather harsh feelings with the stake missionaries, because they says, well, why don't they leave those people for us to go and see, and why don't they go out and tract and find their own people? And the church and the mission come back and says, you work together. We don't want any of this fighting. If they find somebody that they can teach, they'll teach. If not, why, they go out tracting, and you're the same way. But we was able to bring in a number of families. The spouse, which was a non-member, we got them to come in, and they became active. Then in May, just before my companion, he was scheduled to go home the 1st of June, but the end of May, his wife got in a car accident, so they let him go home to be with his wife 2 weeks early. Then they transferred me out to Santa Monica. And I didn't like that very well. We was up tracting in the rich people. But I'd been out there, over there, just a little over a month when there was another set of missionaries in Studio City that he was a little bit older, but he wanted to, and he was scheduled to go home in the fall, but he wanted to go home and get into technology school. He wanted to, and so they allowed him to go home 2 or 3 months early. I don't remember just how much it was. And so that left a companion now in North Hollywood and Studio City that they didn't have a missionary to go back to. And because no missionaries were coming out at that time, well, we was the last group that got out. So then they assigned me to go back into North Hollywood and be a companion, and it was Elder Arlen Larson who was there. And I got acquainted with him when I first got out there, and we just pretty much kind of clicked as close friends, and so we were very thrilled to be put together as companions. And the whole story of how I met Noreen and so forth, I don't know when you want to get into that, but
whenever's good.
But his family come out was in hers. His family come out to visit, and so Noreen come. And as we become acquainted, I sit back and look, and I says, what are the chances of this thing? Her and I, we kind of bonded real. It wasn't that we were lovey-dovey, we weren't, but anyway, we were friends. But I stopped to thinking, of all of my ancestors and where they come from, out of England and out of Scotland, and they went to South Africa, and then from South Africa back up and ended up in St. Anthony and back in Louisville. And under those circumstances, I was called on a mission, but I was called on a mission to California. And Arlen, her brother, in his younger years, he had nephritis, kidney disease, and they didn't hardly expect him to live, but they got him over it. When he went to get his missionary call, why, the doctor told him that he was not to go to any cold country. So they immediately called him to the, well, it was back in Boston anyway at that time, New England States Mission. Well, a terrible cold in the wintertime. And so when he got his call, he went to the doctor, and the doctor says, no way, I won't approve you going there. Tell him to issue another call. So they went back to the church and said, you'll have to issue another call to him. So lo and behold, this time he got his call, and guess what? He called to Billings, Montana. That's a terrible cold up there. So he went back to the doctor, and the doctor says, come on, this young man cannot go to a cold country, so you're going to have to issue him another call. Well, then his next call was issued to California Mission, and he was assigned to San Fernando Valley and that's how we come together. So I says, Providence brought us together. Perhaps we even knew one another before. And we both, it wasn't love at first sight. We wrote for a year, and I wasn't going to write to her, and I guess she was prodding Arlen, and Arlen came and says, why don't you write to my sister? I said, well, I don't know, she's got another boyfriend maybe, I don't know. He says, oh, come on, he says, write to her. So I wrote to her, and it just kind of evolved. So I think we were meant to be together. But I was then transferred to Tujunga, which is the next valley over from San Fernando. And I served there for 5 months. And I had a companion that the two of us, we just didn't hardly see eye to eye. He had all the money he needed. His daddy was had deep pockets, and he bought him a new car, and he supplied him with money to buy T-bone steaks with, and it was always a fight. So I finally says, just get me out of here. So they transferred me out to Ontario, California, and I went out there in May. And I was made a companion to the supervising elder, and we traveled around some, and then I was given a companion that they'd sent back from England because he had trouble with his nose and all of that type of thing. So we became companions, and we did a lot of walking, we did a lot of tracking, we did a lot of teaching, and I thought, man, I asked for this, and I think the Lord really says, okay, you wanted that? You got it. I was in there from May, cleared down to December. We never had a baptism. We taught and we taught and we taught. But we had some good people, and they switched our missionary plan back along about that time. We went 16 lessons before we got courage enough to ask them to be baptized. And that was part of the problem. So they come in, and our supervising elder lived with us, and he come back one day and he says, well, I just got out of the mission home down there, and they've issued us a new missionary program. It's called the Great Lakes Plan. And it went from 16 lessons down to 6. You ask them to be baptized on the first lesson. When you went out tracting, you went to started wearing a felt hat. That was part of the protocol. So you go to the door and rap on the door and say, "We are ministers of the gospel and we've come to call." And you just shut up. And then they invite you in, you toss your hat in the chair where they might sit, you got to the table, and you went through a different set of. So I went back and I said, well, if it works that way, some of that's going to work with these people I've been working with all of this time. So I used some of the same tactics on them. But nevertheless, in that last 2 months of my mission, we baptized 15 people. What a way to end your mission, you know. And we had the supervising elder come out one day, and he says, well, I can only be here a little while. I said, no, you're going to be here all day and this evening. He said, no, I can't. I said, yes, you can. I says, we've got appointments all set up today and tonight. We've got 5 baptisms lined up for you to interview. And there's no way you're going to get out of here without going and doing that. And he stayed with us. But some of those people were great people, and many of them were very active right up to the time they as they got older. There was one part member family that along in the summer he started coming and going to choir. Him and his wife sang in the choir, but his wife was a member and he wasn't. And her family was members, but he was a priest. I think her dad was a priest. So we says, well, we'll go and talk to him. And he come to me after that. He says, Elder Kershaw, don't go to his home. He will be cantankerous and you'll ruin him for whatever we're doing. I says, okay. But that's only an invitation for a missionary. That's a challenge when they tell you that. So the next day or two, my companion in the evening, we just went right out to his home, went up and knocked on the door. He come out, and I says, well, we're the missionaries. We'd like to come in and visit with you. And he says, come on in. And we set up discussions, started teaching them the gospel. And in one of those in December, that he was one of them that I nailed. I went to him one night and I says, Delane, we've been coming here a long time. When we come here, it was with one intent, that if you was interested, you went along, that you was going to be baptized. Delane, it's time for you to be baptized. We're having a baptismal service this Saturday night. We're here inviting you to be baptized on Saturday night. He says, okay. But he's one of them, and him and his wife later divorced. Their daughter went bad, but he stayed very active. He was the only member of his family, and so he started doing genealogy work. I went in down to visit my son Lynn down there, and so I called him on the phone, and he says, well, come on out, and we'll go to breakfast. So Noreen and I went out there, and he told us some of it. He says, temple work is my number one priority. He says, I can't remember the thousands of endowments that he had performed in that amount of time. But going back to the night that he was baptized, we went in there, and they had asked her father to baptize him, which was fine with us. But he come to me all dressed in white, and he shook my hand, and he says, Elder Kershaw, it's unbelievable what a tremendous job you did with our son-in-law. We'll be forever appreciative of what you did. I didn't say a word. I just thank you. I could have said, yeah, you told me not to go there, and I see how, I could have just mashed him. But that's not the missionary spirit, so. But we had some great people. We had one couple that we baptized. We baptized her. He was already a member. They filled a stake mission, and they filled 2 full-time missions. And they brought in all kinds of relatives and friends and everything. So my mission was a great experience all the way around. My biggest lesson, patience. To be patient with people and learn to love them and watch them progress and help them to get. Sometimes you have to be I found that I had to be very forthright and come right out and tell them what had to be done. But I was capable to do that. In my patriarchal blessing, it states, and my patriarchal blessing is only about 2/3 of a page, but one of the sentences in there that they says, you will learn the principles of the gospel and you will be able to teach them effectively. And I took that as a gift from our Father in heaven, and so I tried to develop that, and I developed being able to talk to people and teach them and get them to understand what it was all about. There's a lot of other things, but that's the biggest thing.